week new hellscape, am I right, folks? We're really staring down the barrel here. So, for those of you that didn't see my more immediate reaction to the Ruth Bader Ginsburg problem, uh, I'm still not optimistic at all. Um, Essentially, the the Democrats were on TV this weekend. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were on TV this weekend, and of course, this is the only thing that anyone's talking about. Um, and I suppose that's the correct thing. And they were asked what they had as far as uh, recourse against Trump picking somebody, and they basically just both said that they were going to pursue procedural ways to slow down a Supreme Court nomination or to stop a Supreme Court nomination. There are two of those. I've done some very boring readings for you. There are two of those. One, they can basically put everything to a vote, everything to a floor vote. So, starting a session goes to a floor vote, ending a session goes to a floor vote, showing up for the vote at all goes to a floor vote. Should we break for lunch goes to a floor vote. I mean, calling a floor vote for literally everything. From now until the election or longer, you know, until, January 25th, until inauguration, basically. Or the election if Trump wins. Or they can, there's something about, like, calling for a procedural vote or something like that on all already introduced legislation. So little stuff like naming post offices and that kind of stuff, they can move that to a procedural vote, which takes time because you have to bring everybody together. And of course now, because everybody's having to social distance and whatever, that's even more of a pain in the ass. And they've only got about 50 days. Plus you got to go through an entire Senate confirmation process. So those are the only two, like, light touch procedural, like, let's not rock the boat too much things that the Democrats are saying that they're going to do, right? And that will not work. That will not work. It won't work for them politically because it will. Hypocrisy never affects the Republicans. It always affects the Democrats. So they will look like hypocrites because they bitched for years about obstructing Obama and using wonky Senate procedure to slow everything down in the government, and then they'll just be doing it. And because the Democrats have painted themselves into a corner of, like, well, we're not going for anybody who's radical or wants any kind of real change. We want to slice off a couple of Republicans. That's all that matters. And so Fox News will run, hey, look, they're being hypocrites again. Look, they're being hypocrites again. And then those Republicans that you've spent millions of dollars trying to get away from Trump will just be like, no, screw you. I'm not doing that. Especially on the biggest political prize that they've been able to achieve in the last, like, 4 decades. Uh, so what would happen? So let's go to the next scenario. What would happen if the Democrats decided to be a little more radical, and in fighting back against Trump appointing somebody to the Supreme Court? Okay, so in that situation, if they wanted to actually expend some political capital and get off of their ass and take a risk in an election year, which they are clearly not interested in doing, then what they will do is they will threaten to pack the court, and I'll explain what that means in just a second, after Trump loses. Now, this is a big bet because if Trump wins, then it's carte blanche forever. Like, he gets his Supreme Court nomination. And you also have the problem of like, if he feels like it's a janky deal, the election, then he might just ram somebody through. Nobody can stop him from ramming somebody through in the lame duck session. Yeah, word. Chat says Grassley and Shelby are both 86 and Huff is 85. Thoughts and prayers. True. I hope it works out for those guys. And there are some Republicans, like I think Mitt Romney's doing that thing where he's trying to get like brownie points. He loves his Mormon brownie points where he like does something very, very principled, but it doesn't cost him anything politically because everybody knows he's going to do it, and it doesn't change the vote if one guy does something. So he's the John McCain. He's the John McCain if John McCain was still alive, which is like, I'll do the decent thing because it literally costs me absolutely nothing politically and just makes me look like a good guy because it doesn't hurt the Republicans. They have enough votes without him, so he can be the one maverick guy. So anyway, if they decide to escalate this deal and be a little more rah-rah about it, then what they can do is threaten to pack the court, which would mean that if Joe Biden wins, then they could use constitutional authority, because there is nothing in the Constitution barring a sitting president from packing the court. It's just kind of in all intents and purposes, it's kind of a just gentleman's agreement between our government that basically says like, nah, we're going to leave it at 9 and call it a day. Because FDR had more. FDR had FDR packed the court. And it's kind of that similar thing to where FDR was elected president 3 times. Because like there's not really a law saying that. It had just been a gentleman's agreement that everybody leaves after 2 terms. Right? So they could put it out into the press, have press conferences, make statements, go on TV, and talk about how if the Republicans choose to make this decision, then they are showing that they are not good, like, stewards of democracy and the Constitution, and therefore we're going to pack the court when we get in to rebalance the power. Now, that would be if they're feeling really froggy about this. There is no indication whatsoever that Nancy Pelosi is going to take that difficult road. Because she is yet another old lady that, it is not a normal system to live in, that we're all just like completely fucked because an 87-year-old woman who had cancer like 5 different times died. That's not a normal thing. That's too much power in one place, guys. And used to, like, we had an understanding of that as a society where, like, even the Republicans would say stuff like, there's not, they would point out imbalances of power, but that's just not going on anymore for some reason. And the insane thing about this is, it's very obvious. Like, it's very obvious that that's too much power in one place. And the thing about it is people always say, well, the Constitution is what makes the Supreme Court a co-equal branch. And that's not true. The Constitution establishes the Supreme Court and gives it enumerated duties. But in 1803, the Marbury versus Madison decision was what codified into law the idea that the Supreme Court has the privilege of constitutional review, which is just basically a fancy way of saying that if Congress passes a law, the Supreme Court can decide to take it up and make sure that it's constitutional. And that's basically like unlimited veto power on Congress. That's basically unlimited veto power on Congress, and the Republicans figured this out a while ago. And that's why they've been making these moves, is because if you control the Supreme Court ideologically, not necessarily like, mwahaha, I'm sitting in a smoke-filled room, like literally puppeteering the Supreme Court. That's not what I mean. I just mean if you control it ideologically, in that you can get more people on the Supreme Court that believe immigrants are evil or whatever, or trans people aren't humans, or gay people don't have rights under the law, or whatever the hell. If you can get them to outnumber the other folks on the Supreme Court, then you run the place, because they can review everything that Congress writes. Even if the president signs it into law, like Obamacare, the Supreme Court can tie that shit up forever in the courts, reviewing it, and if they feel like it, and if they have the ideological nutsack to do it, can repeal a bunch of stuff. That's the reason that Trump isn't trying to repeal Obamacare in the with a new plan in the House and the Senate, because he doesn't have to. He can just go to the Supreme. He could take it to the Supreme Court over and over and over and over again, and keep trying to hammer it from different directions, and eventually get rid of what's left of Obamacare, which was a terrible policy to begin with, and of course, but there are millions of people who have protections for pre-existing conditions, are at least able to do like the buy-ins into the marketplace, so they're not, buying junk insurance like they were before. Like, I think 30 million more people have healthcare, right? So, like, that has to be preserved until we have an actual common sense thing. So, essentially what happened in this case, right? This is fascinating because it just points out the fact that, like, we are living in the shadows of decisions of people who didn't even bathe. Like, we live in a society where people can go from New York City to Los Angeles in 4 hours. And we are taking direction from guys who, if you wanted to get from New York to Virginia, it would have taken you 2 weeks. And it would have been the hardest, most laborious trip ever. Like, these guys literally, like, wore wooden shoes. And we're taking our direction from these people. Now, a certain amount of that is Enlightenment thinking, and that era of leadership and specifically literature, and the way that people conceptualized what liberty actually was at the time. Yes, okay, fine. Like, there are some pieces to keep that, but the Constitution has always been meant to be a living document. And the Supreme Court in Marbury versus Madison was allowed to make their own decision. They were allowed to basically rule on their own power. So here's the like 60-second really bad history version of how this went down. Essentially, Thomas Jefferson becomes the third president of the United States in the election of 1800. John Adams was the president, and leading up to him having to leave office and see his power to Jefferson, and they were from separate parties at the time, because you had the Federalists, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton, as I'm sure a lot of you nerds know, and then Jefferson and Madison and James Madison were anti-Federalists, right? And it's a big, long, boring argument they were having about, like, how we should fund our country, how we should allocate the resources of our country, and ultimately the Federalists won, and that's the reason that the Capitol is in D.C. and that the stock exchange is in New York. And yeah, so anyway, John Adams loses the presidency because he was a feckless idiot and a terrible public speaker. The dude just had no affect with the population at all. So Jefferson is about to assume power, and Adams decides, well, screw this. I have unilateral power as president to appoint judges. So what I'll do is I'm just going to cram a bunch of Federalist judges, because John Adams, being John Adams, had this fire in his belly about, like, what I think should be done for the country is the morally correct thing, and these people are just standing in my way. Right? And, hindsight's 20/20 on that, but basically it's the whole reason that he pushed so hard for independence, the whole reason that he pushed so hard for the revolution, uh, for the separation of the colonies, was because he was such a like hothead about shit. Like he was just so right-headed about stuff. Like if I think it, it's automatically correct. And again, hindsight's 2020 on this stuff. Like, thanks for the country, bro. But also, there was a lot of conciliatory shit that he did for a while that really screwed us. I mean, trading slavery for getting it done, it comes to mind. But anyway, he's an affectless president. Um, he's just completely. There's a tie in the election of 1800. Jefferson's about to come into office after the tie's broken, and then Adams appoints all these judges to try and backstop Jefferson dismantling the federal government, because ultimately that's what he wanted to do, because Jefferson was just like really kind of an asshole, as they all were. They were all like, they were all like, I know everything, and therefore I am the ruler of men. Like, I need to impart my will on the way that this country works, because if I don't, then I'm sure that was shocking after I've been drinking out of a tiny coffee cup. Anyway, so one of these judges is Marbury. Okay, and I forget his first name. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The guy has been appointed to a federal judgeship. And in order for them to begin their job, John Adams, as president, had to have written a commission, which outlines what their job is and basically talks about how, like, and basically names them by name for the public record as a judge, right? It's a very, like, procedural thing. I'm sure we just auto-print these now. But anyway, at the time, John Adams would have literally had to have put quill to paper and written this son of a bitch out. And he had appointed all of these judges. So in the lag time between Adams appointing these judges and Jefferson taking power, some of these letters didn't make it yet, or hadn't made it yet, or Adams hadn't written them yet, or whatever. And one of those was notably Marbury's. So Jefferson, when he appoints James Madison to be Secretary of State, orders James Madison to retain those letters and make sure that they are not delivered to the remaining judges. And Marbury is one of these judges. Now, most of these fucking judges go, okay, well, it's a new president. He runs the place now. Like, all right, that sucks, but okay. But Marbury is this elitist asshole who feels like he deserves the courtship. He's very accomplished, and I want the job. And blah, 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 blah. And very very sure of himself. So he sues James Madison, and really the federal government, right, to have his job instated, to get his commencement or whatever it's called, and start his job. So this trial goes back and forth for a while, and it's decided by John Marshall, who is the big boy on the Supreme Court. And John Marshall basically makes the decision that, one, the government does not have the right to hold up his commendation. Two, that Marbury has the right to redress from his government about the fact that they just screwed him out of a job, right? Basically, that he can sue the federal government and in court and get his redress, his grievances redressed. The third has almost nothing to do with the case, is entirely political, but it basically says that the Constitution, the reason that he's able to make these two decisions is because the Constitution did not enumerate the right for the Supreme Court. I'm trying to remember exactly how this is worded because it's important. Basically, the ruling says that the Supreme Court is not able to oversee, or is not able to force the federal government and specifically the office of the presidency, to deliver these commendations because the Supreme Court is an equal and independent branch, not a superseding legal force over the other two branches. Right? Now, this at the time is monumental. It is a huge blow to the power of Congress, which was set up to be the most democratic body in the United States. The Congress was set up to run the place. The president drives the ship, Congress runs the place, and the Supreme Court was set up originally to uphold laws. So if you have a particularly, like to actually see cases on a regular basis, right? Rather than seeing these landmark cases, 4 times a year or whatever the hell. So, and a much more robust body. So this is a huge blow to the power of Congress at the time. And it is a direct direct action taken by the Supreme Court to increase the Supreme Court's power. It's that thing that Republicans are always mad about. They vote in Congress, they vote for their own raises. This is like that, except they voted to be an equal branch of government, and then we all just went, okay. The Supreme Court was never designed to be that. And because it is and within that decision, he established the precedent of judicial review. Which judicial review is, let's say that, I went over this earlier, but basically, judicial review is Congress passes a law. That law goes to the president's desk, the president signs it. The Supreme Court can then choose to take up that law. We'll use Obamacare again as the example. To say, now, granted, there has to be somebody who brings it to the Supreme Court or whatever. I don't think the Supreme Court can just unilaterally take it up. But because they are able to do judicial review, the Supreme Court can take a case presented by someone, and generally it's the Republicans, that bring it up. In this case, with Obamacare, it's the Republicans that bring it up and say, hey, this is unconstitutional. And then the Supreme Court can go in and figure out why. Now, granted, the party bringing the suit has to provide reasoning for this, but the Supreme Court can go in and say yes or no. That's why Obamacare's had so many stints in the Supreme Court, because they're trying to peel it apart a little bit at a time, because it's very complicated legislation that makes no sense and done. And so in Marshall's decision, again, this is 1803. In Marshall's decision, he establishes the right of the Supreme Court to judicial review. And here we are, 217 years later, living under this system. And we all have to, tuck in our balls because an 87-year-old woman who had cancer 1 billion times passed away. That's sad. When anyone dies, that's sad, of course. But, dude, what sort of a system do you live in that someone like that, someone fitting that description, passes away, and there are millions of people looking around going oh, we're fucked now. Like I said, we're fucked last night or yesterday when I was on talking about it, but I'm a white dude in Texas. My life is mostly going to stay the same. But there are, in theory, they'll find some way. But there are people that, are going to be under assault for the next 20, 30 years. Because of this. And that's a normal system. So, yeah, if Democrats really want to get big ball about it, then they will threaten to abolish the filibuster if they take the Senate, which is looking more and more likely that they will, although this Supreme Court vacancy really throws a wrench into that. Because it's going to drive turnout on both sides. And generally, if turnout is equally driven on both sides, the Republicans will win because Republicans vote at a higher rate. So, if they really want to big dick it, then what they will do is they will threaten to abolish the filibuster if they win the Senate, and then pack the court. But the problem is, and we just talked about this, you have to support the Supreme Court having the amount of power it does as an institution in order to argue for that. And so basically what they're saying is, we are going to take power and pack the court because we believe that the Supreme Court should have unilateral power to judicial review and overturning laws that we pass as a body. They would be voting against their own power. Now, granted, they're going to do it, or they're going, like, that is the most extreme thing that the Democrats would ever do, and even then, they're not going to do it. I think, just my personal opinion, the leftist position is that we strip Congress of that constitutional review. Or, we strip the Supreme Court of constitutional review. And that can be done unilaterally by a president. The president can rule that ruling was advisory and not regulatory. Like that. Presidential order rules that Marbury versus Madison was advisory, and then we don't have to live under constitutional review anymore from the Supreme Court. It limits their power to take up past laws. Because if you don't think that if we do get Medicare for All or a Green New Deal or something like that at some point, some massive piece of legislation, hell, even if we get Joe Biden's half-ass green plan or whatever the hell, even if we get that, you don't think that the Republicans aren't going to run that thing through the Supreme Court just like they did Obamacare and everything else? I mean, they're trying to run like Texas voter registration laws through the Supreme Court. And they're just going to keep doing that because they've won the game. The game was, and it has been for 30, 40 years, the Democrats just haven't known that they've been playing. The game has been win the Supreme Court. Get as many people as we can on in the court system. Get them young, get them ideological, and get them in every place that we can. And Trump knocked that out of the park. He knocked that out of the park. He might end up being one of the most influential American presidents that's ever lived because he did nothing but appoint judges. Like, super duper speed play style. And so now, we have to have a real conversation now about whether or not this is an institution that we want to keep. Now, granted, keep it, but whether it's an institution that we want to have the power that it does. Because if you want things like Medicare for All, if you want things like a Green New Deal, if you want things like a federal jobs program, if you want things like abolishing student debt, paying for people's college with taxpayer money, like anything, defunding the police, anything at all that falls within the like leftist Bernie Sanders worldview, I guess, those things cannot happen as long as the Supreme Court has that much power and authority. Because the Republicans have won the court game. And so they will just run you through the courts and get rid of everything that you try and do. Especially if Trump appoints somebody. Now, if Trump doesn't appoint somebody, they still have a 5-3 majority. Maybe it goes to a 5-4 and we get an actual liberal judge nomination from Joe Biden, but God knows that's not a certainty. He's more likely to nominate somebody that's right down the middle and doesn't offend anybody than he is to so that he can show that like he got a quick confirmation and is uniting the country and shit, rather than appointing somebody who they're going to call a crazy liberal socialist, whatever, which they're going to do anyway. But who cares? So it's very much in doubt that Joe Biden will be our savior on this either. So this thing has got to go as an institution. The leftist position on this has to be, it's got to go as an institution. The powers that are enumerated to it through not the Constitution, just through like bad legal precedent that we've been living under for 200 something years, we live in a different world now. Like we have to revamp how the branches of Congress or the branches of government interact with each other. In theory, in theory, in a world where we don't have an insane campaign finance system, your Congress should be your most democratic level of government, meaning it's the most responsive to the people. So, like, those people are all directly elected. Those people are all uh, elected through popular vote, in theory. And they have to actually campaign in their districts, which are smaller sectors of the country. Now, granted, I think that it is actually impossible, and we're wasting a lot of time trying to figure out how to effectively govern this country from one place. You know, like this country as one piece, because it's not. It's enormous. It is impossible to govern it from DC. Just impossible. Plus, you have so many different interests from so many different backgrounds. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So in theory, the Congress should be the most democratic, and it isn't because of gerrymandering and because of campaign finance. But again, in theory, if you can get rid of those two problems, which again, in theory, would be much easier than abolishing the entire government or whatever and setting up like, you know, Marxist paradise or whatever the hell. Instead, your solution should be get rid of gerrymandering. Yeah, get rid of gerrymandering. Get rid of campaign finance insanity. Directly elect the Congress and make voting day a national holiday. DC statehood, Puerto Rico statehood, all of that, and get more people involved, give more people the ability to be involved, get the access to the ballot strengthened. You know, if we can't vote online, which I don't know, I've never heard a compelling reason why we can't do that other than like some weird security thing, but like, dude, I get into my bank online, I pay my taxes online. Every other thing that I do with the federal government, I do online. Um, so I don't know, like, I don't know about that, but like, universal mail-in ballots, uh, like, I just don't understand why we couldn't give people, like, the more people that you give direct access and the ability to vote, the more democratic your society will be by definition. Now, you could increase that by adding stuff like direct ballot initiatives. So, say you go to vote for president, because again, that's how most people participate in politics. Say you go to vote for president, and it's Trump, Biden at the top, your senator, your congressman, local races, and then at the bottom it's like 5 direct ballot initiatives. Should marijuana be legal in the United States? Should should we have Medicare for all? Should DC be a state? Should Puerto Rico be a state? Like whatever you want to put to these initiatives, and then the American people popular vote on that. Those votes go to DC. They count them up, and then we say, okay, weed's legal now. Like, plus you institute a ranked choice voting system. Now, this is for the people who are still willing to believe that electoral politics is the answer. The issue with all of these things is it will take too long and we will all be on fire. So, great, awesome. We did it. We made a democracy, but Yosemite exploded or whatever. So, oh well. Or the ozone just like shriveled and went away, and so now we're all just microwaving to death slowly. Like none of this stuff matters if you can't handle the existential crisis. Like you can go ahead and make voting a national holiday and do all the things that I just listed, but if people still have to work 80-hour weeks for no pay and 1 in 4 American children are food insecure, like, does that really matter? Are people going to have the time or inclination or give a shit to go and vote? If you don't fix those systemic, like, actual problems that are going on. No. No, 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 no. So the point here is like it's it's a it's a vicious circle. You're literally living through a period of like, I don't participate in politics because they don't work for me. Politics don't work for you because you don't participate. And then it just eats itself. And there is no one to blame. Well, there is someone to blame. The person to blame is the person who is in power. Because I, as an individual voter, don't have any power over the way that my system is set up. But if you, Barack Obama or Nancy Pelosi or whoever wants to make a speech about how we should vote more, you are the one that has the ability to figure out why people don't vote, which I just diagnosed in like 10 seconds, and then make a change to the material conditions in people's lives so that you can incentivize them to vote. Or, even easier, just offer to do that so that people will take the time to go and vote. But they are not interested in doing either of those things. They are interested in shaming people that do vote into voting for them because, well, the other people are evil, and if you're a morally good person, you'll vote for us, even though the bombings will continue, the complete immiseration of poor people will continue, food insecurity for children will continue, child slavery child labor overseas that is feeding into our production system, our dependence on foreign oil, you name it, climate change, like mass wars abroad. It will continue, but we'll be nice about it, and you can go back to brunch. I mean, that's literally the conversation that we're having as a country right now. It's like, hey, listen. Um, imagine trying to explain, like, imagine an alien lands on Earth, right, and asks you like, what's going on politically. You would basically have to go through a 30-minute diatribe of American politics wherein you mention the name Stormy Daniels or Monica Lewinsky or the words Clinton's emails or the Comey letter or Russian interference. I mean, the amount of insanity that you would have to explain to this alien in order to encapsulate what is going on politically in our country, they would just leave. Because the governing theory, like the theory of governance, regardless of your system, should be, now it hasn't ever been historically, but it should be, and we all know this, that you work for us. You do the stuff that we ask you to do, and we keep electing you. But that's not how it works. That's not how our government is structured at all. Our government is structured in, well, we work here. We just work here. And if bad stuff happens, then, we'll tweet about it. But we just work here. It's the Republicans that are obstructionists, so we can't get anything done. Or it's the Democrats who are insane, so we can't get anything done. When in reality, as soon as they need something done, like, cutting a check to Wall Street and big business during the coronavirus thing, or passing the corporate liability shield so that no companies can be sued if their workers contract coronavirus on the job or whatever. When they want to get that shit done, oh yeah, problem solved. Got it. Good to go. But when there's actual like systemic problems that they do recognize, I mean, they're tweeting about them all the time. Gun violence, the opioid crisis, climate change, people waiting in food bank lines because they've been out of work forever, unemployment benefits expiring, the poverty rate increasing at a shocking rate. We're looking at, like, by the end of the year, most of commercial real estate in this country is going to be underwater. By the beginning of next year, most of the personally, multifamily home real estate is going to be in trouble. I mean, we are staring down the barrel of one of the biggest bubbles in American history, and everybody's just like, oh well. You know, I read this this interesting thing the other day. This guy was talking about how like for the boomers, right? Like for the boomer generation, they mostly came home from the war and established their personal their family's wealth by buying a home, usually through the assistance of like the VA or something like that, and buying a home, paying it off, and owning the land it was on, and that was their source of personal wealth, right? And the plan always was, we're going to buy a home, it will be worth money, home values appreciate forever and ever, amen. And then the next generation will buy my home so that I can put that money in the bank and retire from my job, get my pension, have my savings, move to Florida or whatever the hell, live in a bungalow and retire and die. Right? That was essentially the boomer uh like arc, right? Very simplified boomer arc. The next generation was Gen X. Gen X bought all those houses. As the boomers retired gradually, the Gen Xers got to be 30 something years old, 25, 30, 35 years old, where they were ready financially and in a part of their career where they could buy a home. And that bailed out the financial investment of the boomers. It kept the money flowing between people. Boomers retired, having sold their house, in most cases, having sold their house to a Gen Xer. Gen Xer started families and started raising kids in those houses. Or, you know, in new houses built on the same property or whatever. The wealth transfer is the same. The bubble that we are sitting on right now, right, is that because of the teachings of the boomers that, hey, this is how you accrue personal wealth, and like, hey, don't worry about it, buy a house and you'll be good, right? The Gen Xers followed this mentality with the same theory. Hey, we're going to buy a nice house, I'll sell it when I retire, and move to a smaller house, live off of my house profits and my little bit of retirement, my 401k and all that bullshit, and then, you know, I'll be good. And with that and Social Security, and I can retire with dignity, right? Now, lower rate than the boomers, obviously, because Gen X got completely screwed, but, you know, still, that was the goal. That was the projection. Who the fuck are they going to sell their houses to? Honestly. Anyway, I will leave you with that. See you tomorrow.